Hi everyone. I hope you guys had a good week and are ready to start chapter 14. We only have this chapter 15, and then chapter 17 left to do. So we are almost done. Hang with me. I promise this will go by pretty quick. So chapter 14 is all about the interactions that are in ecosystems and how they impact the ecosystems. So first we have to look at the difference between habitat, so where an organism lives, and its niche. So a habitat combines all of the living and non-living or biotic and abiotic factors found in an area where the organism lives. So think like the tree. A tree is a habitat. Organisms live in it. It involves living and non-living factors. But an ecological niche is all of the physical, chemical, and biological factors that the species needs in order to survive, to stay healthy, and to reproduce. So that includes water supply, weather, all of those things factor into the ecological niche. Competitive exclusion is a theory that states that no two species can occupy the same niche at the same time. And ecological equivalence is when organisms share a similar niche but live in very different geological regions. So habitats are different from niches. More than one organism can occupy a habitat, but only one organism can occupy the niche. Habitats are described as all the living and non-living factors where a particular organism lives, include all aspects of the environment, including grass, trees, rocks, pond, river, lakes, ocean, things like that. Niches start to involve the physical, chemical, and biological factors that the species needs in order to survive, to stay healthy, and to reproduce. These include the type of food that an organism will eat, the weather, which is an abiotic factor, and behavior. So what time of day is that species active? When does it reproduce in the year? On top of the chemical cycles and the physical interaction between the organisms. So resource availability gives structure to the communities within an ecosystem. The ability to survive and reproduce is the driving force behind natural selection. All species need food, water, and shelter in order to survive. You could actually survive with just those three things: food, water, shelter. Organisms that are best suited to their environment obtain these resources faster and are more likely to survive and reproduce more offspring in comparison to those that cannot obtain these three things. It is very weird to think that we only need food, water, and shelter in order to survive, but that is actually all you need to survive and live. You don't need anything else. Competitive exclusion is when many species share the same habitat. Two species use the same resources in the same way. One species will always become better adapted to their environment because they're competing for that environment. Competitive exclusion states that when two species are competing for the same resource, one species becomes best suited for the environment, making it that species' niche, and the other species gets pushed into another niche or can become extinct. Niche partitioning is the dividing of a niche into two smaller niches. So think of a squirrel that takes the nuts from the top of the tree while the other species of squirrel takes nuts from the ground. That separates out that one tree, that habitat of the tree, into two separate niches. So they do become divided. Evolutionary response is when two species could experience a divergent evolution. An example being that one species being selected for larger teeth becomes better at cracking larger nuts, while the other species is selected for smaller teeth, which becomes better eating seeds and smaller nuts or berries. Then eventually these two become separate species through evolution. Ecological equivalents are in different communities. The species that occupy similar niches but live in different geographical areas. So I have a species of robin living in my backyard. That is their niche, but you could also have a family of robins living in your backyard. They're occupying the same, almost identical niches, but they are in two very different areas. I am in Manchester, you are in Pelham. When two similar species prey on, eat, and live in similar niches, they are considered ecological equivalents because they're in different geographical areas. 14.2, it's a little long with the vocab. I'm just going to read the vocab words, make sure you fill in your notes, because I want to keep this video as short as possible. So our vocab for community interaction, chapter 14.2, is competition, predation, symbiosis, mutualism, commensalism, parasitism. I'm sure most of these words sound pretty familiar. So competition and predation are two ways in which organisms are interacting with one another. Competition occurs when two organisms fight for the same limiting resource, those limiting resources being food, shelter, or water. There are two different types of competition. First is interspecific, and the other is intraspecific competition. Interspecific occurs when two different species compete for the same limiting resource, such as shelter or space. And intraspecific is when organisms of the same species struggle against one another for the limiting resources of food or water. Predation is the process by which one organism captures and feeds upon another organism. Predators are your carnivores, your omnivores, or your apex predators. So our poor little field mouse getting swooped up by our snow owl. Symbiosis is when organisms have the ability to live in close contact with one another. The close ecological relationship between two or more organisms affects different species that live in direct contact with one another. There are three types of symbiosis. We have mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. The number one example of symbiosis that people think of is the clownfish and the sea anemone. They live and benefit because of each other. Mutualism is the interspecies interaction in which both organisms benefit from one another. So that is your clownfish and your sea anemone. Your clownfish find shelter in the sea anemone because they do not get shocked by the sea anemone, and the sea anemone gets cleaned by the clownfish going in and out of it. And then another example, this is a hummingbird in a flower. So flowers feed the hummingbirds, but hummingbirds also help pollinate the flowers. Commensalism is a relationship between two organisms in which one receives ecological benefit from the other, while the second organism is neither harmed nor helped. So suckerfish and sharks is the best example of this. Suckerfish feed off of the algae and the bacteria that grow on sharks, but the shark doesn't benefit at all from this because they can live with that bacteria on them, which also helps prevent the suckerfish also get safety from the shark because the shark being an apex predator. And parasitism is the relationship involving a species that directly harms its host. It's similar to predation in that one organism benefits while the other is harmed. The key for parasitism is that the parasite itself needs a host to harm it. So ticks, most insects, things like that are parasites. And that's all I have for you guys today. We will touch upon 14.3 next week, which is the end of chapter 14. Chapter 15 is very short, so we are zooming right along, and I will see you guys later.